get going on this geometry section 1.4.2 for our Apex learning. This section is all about dimensions and things that stop and things that don't stop. So basically, what's being asked here in the first 8 questions is how many dimensions does something have? A dimension is like the directions it can go. So if I have a point in space, it goes nowhere because it's just a point. So that's 0 dimensions. If I have a line segment, it's going in one dimension, like it's going that direction or whatever. It has something, but it doesn't have a height. It just has a width. Okay, so it only has one dimension to talk about. If I have something like a square has a height or a length and a width. There's 2 things. So there's the length and there's the width of this square that we can measure. So that's 2 different dimensions that we can measure. And then finally, if I had, say, a cube. Okay, so a cube has a length, a width, and a height that I could measure. Oh, sorry. Wrong one. And a height that I can measure. There's 3 things to measure, so that's 3 dimensions. All right. So we just have to go through each of these and say how many dimensions. Is it 1D, 2D, 3D? And this does relate to movies. Most movies are 2-dimensional movies. They're flat screen. When you put on those 3D glasses, it's coming out at you, so it's a 3-dimensional movie. So that is the connection you can make to movies. So a solid. A solid is like a cube. It's anything pretty much around you, your chair, your table. Anything solid we describe as a 3-dimensional object. A plane. A plane, you should think about planes as like a piece of paper. It's what we're working on, but it's flat. Because it's flat and has no height, it'll only be a 2-dimensional object. Lines, we already did a line segment. It's just a line, like it only has a length to it. We can measure out that length, but it doesn't have any width to it. So we would call that a 1-dimensional object, which a segment is a cut up line. So also 1-dimensional. Okay. A ray. If we think about a ray, it starts and just goes one way. It's flat. It has no height to it. So once again, 1-dimensional. So anything that looks like a line, whether it is a ray, a segment, or the line itself, all 1-dimensional. Squares, I've already talked about a square. It has a length and a width, so that is 2-dimensional. Points go nowhere and do nothing. They are 0-dimensional. And a 45-degree angle, it has a going upward and it's going outward, so there's 2 directions to it. We would call that a 2-dimensional object. Okay. And then our next questions just ask about infinite. So this is some terminology that you might see. Some things are finite, which means we can measure them. And other things are more theoretical. So for instance, a plane. In geometry, a plane is what we're on. Okay? It's normally kind of shown with a little rhombus, but definitionally speaking, we can't measure it. It's just like that infinite surface. If the floor in your house could go on forever and we could measure things, that would be a plane. So this is infinite. It goes on forever. Lines, similarly, that's what those arrows at the end of our line represent. Arrows show like eternity, so I cannot measure them. Segments, on the other hand, have 2 endpoints. So I could, in theory, measure a segment. It's a terrible segment, I'm so sorry. Because it has endpoints, I can measure that that's 5 centimeters. Solids are a box. So solids can be measured. In geometric spaces, again, that's like the idea of all of space. So I can build things and do things and create shapes everywhere around me. I have infinite amount of space, so this would also be an infinite answer. So the 3 infinite answers here are plane, line, and geometric spaces. Again, if this was a quiz, just look out for that multiple choice answer type of thing. Finite means there's a limit. Finite means I can measure. Okay, so there's a limit to the size. So think the first answer here is a sphere. A sphere is just a ball. You have a soccer ball in your house. You have a globe. You have a tennis ball. You can measure the size of that ball. So this is definitely finite. It's measurable. A plane. We've already discussed a plane over here. If something's infinite, it cannot also be finite. So they are literally polar opposites of each other. Geometric spaces, another example. I've already circled it over here, which means it cannot be an answer over here, which also should tell us about line. If this changed and instead was a line segment, that would be finite because I can measure that. But just a line is infinite. Okay? And then finally, a cube. You can measure a cube. I have a length, width, and height. You can measure that Amazon box that comes to your house. Okay? So these are our 3, 0, 1, 2 dimensions, and then finite versus infinite. If you have any questions, please reach out to me.